We grow up on Earth as if it were the whole world, a solid home resting quietly in the universe. But the truth is, this planet is racing through space, circling the sun like a thinking grain of dust. When we begin to measure distance not in footsteps, but in light and time, every familiar intuition begins to collapse. This video is a promise to guide you beyond comfort and into the true scale of the universe. If Earth could whisper, what question would it ask you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And before we travel any farther, pause for a moment and ask yourself, how large is Earth really, if we do not measure it with maps, but with time and the journeys of humanity? Have you ever tried to feel the size of Earth? Not as a diagram, not as a number printed beneath an image, but as a lived experience unfolding beneath your feet. The moment you set aside maps and measurements, the planet changes its character. It is no longer a symbol. It becomes a presence. Earth reveals itself slowly, through resistance and patience, through the way distance reshapes intention. A mountain is not impressive because of its height, but because it changes how your body breathes, how your legs argue with gravity, how silence grows heavier as the air thins. An ocean is not vast because of its width, but because it erases the horizon, because it humbles direction, because it reminds you that depth can exist without visibility. We call this place home, as if home were something still. But home is not stationary. Home is a sphere wrapped in cloud and water, turning endlessly through darkness, carrying cities, forests, memories, and every quiet human hope at once. The ground beneath you feels solid, yet it is part of a restless skin, floating on heat and pressure, reshaping itself over ages too long for stories, yet short enough to leave scars we can still read. To understand Earth on human terms, we must abandon distance as our primary language and adopt time instead. Time is how the planet speaks to us. A day is not a unit on a clock. It is Earth completing a turn, presenting the sun again, as if renewing a promise. A year is not a calendar cycle. It is a long arc of light and shadow, a negotiation between tilt and orbit, a reminder that even seasons are consequences of motion. Imagine choosing to cross this world on foot, not as an achievement, not as spectacle, but as attention sustained over months and years. Each morning the horizon waits, faithful and unreachable. Each evening the ground records your passing, one step at a time. Weeks blur into months. Shoes wear thin, thoughts slow, and somewhere along the way, Earth stops feeling like a backdrop and starts feeling like a companion. Vast not because it is far, but because it refuses to be rushed. Even then, even after such a journey, you would have traced only a fragile line, a narrow thread across a surface. You would not have touched the planet's interior, where pressure turns rock into something that flows, where time compresses into heat and silence. You would not have climbed the full height of the atmosphere, that thin breathing veil protecting life, fading gradually into vacuum. Earth is not just wide. It is layered, complex, alive in ways that rarely announce themselves. Carl Sagan once offered a sentence so quiet and so devastatingly clear that it still echoes across generations. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. Those words do not diminish Earth. They contextualize it. They remind us that meaning does not depend on scale, and that intimacy can exist even on a moving point of light. Yet even this intimacy contains a subtle disturbance. We tend to imagine Earth as a foundation, a stable platform beneath our lives. But stability is an illusion gifted by consistency. The planet is in motion, spinning at a speed that would terrify us. If we experienced it directly, it orbits the sun, which itself moves through the galaxy, which drifts among other galaxies, all bound together in a choreography, too vast for instinct to follow. You are not standing still. You are being carried. The fact that you do not feel this movement is not evidence of stillness, but of harmony. Earth has tuned its motion to the fragile needs of life, allowing speed to feel like rest, and motion to masquerade as ground. Albert Einstein once said, "The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious." Perhaps the mystery he meant is not the unknown waiting to be solved, but the known that refuses to feel ordinary. The mystery of standing on a world that behaves like a vehicle, of trusting a surface that is never truly still, of calling something permanent, that exists only through balance. So the question returns, soft but insistent. Are we standing on Earth, or drifting on a moving grain of dust? The answer does not settle into one shape. We stand in human terms. We drift in cosmic ones. The body accepts the ground. The mind learns the motion. This duality is not a flaw. It is an invitation. It asks us to expand our perspective without abandoning our humanity, to feel small without feeling erased, to feel awe without surrendering understanding. Earth teaches this lesson first, before the universe ever enters the conversation. Because once you accept the true scale of your home, the scales beyond it no longer feel absurd. They feel consistent. If a planet can already exceed intuition, if a single world can demand time, patience, and metaphor to be understood, then perhaps the universe is not cruelly large, but honestly so. Earth becomes a threshold, a place where intuition begins to stretch, where education happens quietly, through experience rather than declaration. It shows us that size is not only about distance, but about relationship. A mountain is large because it changes you. A day is meaningful because it carries you. A planet matters because it holds stories, not because it occupies space. And so, before we speak of stars, before galaxies enter the frame, before the universe unfolds into scales that strain language itself, we pause here, on this moving world, on this fragile surface of stone and water, on this place that feels familiar only because it has never stopped carrying us. Have you ever wondered whether the moon would still feel close if you had to cross the distance in absolute silence, with nothing around you but the cold, indifferent dark? In everyday life, near is a human word. It means you can reach something, touch it, return from it, tell a story about it before the coffee gets cold. The moon sits in our sky so faithfully that it becomes part of our emotional furniture, a lamp hung above the world. We treat it like a neighbor because we can see it. But sight can be a gentle liar. The truth is that the space between Earth and the moon is not filled with wind, not filled with birds, not filled with the comforting continuity of air. It is a gap in which sound cannot travel, a corridor in which your own breathing would be the loudest event for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Imagine leaving Earth and rising above the last thin haze of atmosphere. The blue fades, not dramatically at first, but like a memory slipping away. Then comes the great quiet, the kind that does not feel peaceful so much as final. You begin to understand that space is not merely empty, it is actively absent. It does not meet you halfway. It does not offer resistance or welcome. It simply does not care. And somewhere in that widening gulf, the moon waits, pale and scarred, not as a romantic symbol but as a real object separated from you by one of the most unnerving truths of the cosmos, that most of existence is distance. This is where our sense of scale breaks, and where the lesson begins without ever announcing itself as a lesson. Because the Earth-Moon distance is the first time many people confront the difference between what we can imagine and what actually is. On paper, the average distance is about 384,400 kilometers. Those numbers are clean. They behave. They sit politely in a textbook. But in the body, in the nerves, in the deep animal part of the mind that evolved to judge distances across plains and forests, that separation becomes something else entirely. It becomes a question. It becomes a kind of vertigo. Here is one way to feel it. Think of the longest drive you have ever taken, the one that turned hours into a slow blur of road lines and gas stations, the one that made your thoughts stretch out and thin. Now imagine repeating that drive again and again without ever arriving, without ever changing scenery, without even the mercy of wind against your face. If you tried to drive to the moon at highway speed, it would take months, not days, and the view would be the same black silence the entire time. The journey would not be measured by landmarks, it would be measured by patience. And here is another way. Place a line of Earths between Earth and the moon, one touching the next like beads on a string. You could fit roughly 30 Earths into that gap, 30 full worlds, 30 entire horizons. It is a simple mental picture, and that is why it works. It turns a number into a feeling. It tells you, gently but firmly, that what looks close in the sky can still be unimaginably far in reality. As you sit with that thought, the moon stops being a companion and becomes a threshold. It is the first great elsewhere humanity ever touched, and we reached it not by shrinking the cosmos, but by expanding ourselves. Bill Anders, looking back from that distance during Apollo 8, offered a line that still lands like a quiet bell in the mind. We came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth. In one sentence, the moon becomes a mirror. The journey outward turns inward. The vastness does not only rearrange our maps, it rearranges our priorities. Because what happens to our sense of space when there is nothing between two worlds but vacuum is not merely scientific, it is psychological. The vacuum does something subtle to the imagination. It removes the middle. On Earth, distance is softened by atmosphere, by birds, by the gradient of weather, by the sense that the world is continuous. In space, continuity is an illusion you must carry inside you. Outside, there is only separation. The vacuum turns between into a kind of abyss. And yet, paradoxically, that abyss is also what makes connection meaningful. The Earth and the moon are gravitationally bound across emptiness, as if the universe itself is demonstrating that relationship does not require closeness. It requires influence. It requires resonance. The moon pulls the oceans. It stabilizes Earth's tilt. It quietly shapes the rhythms of life, without ever touching us. This is a profound image, if you let it be one. A distant companion, exerting a steady presence through nothing at all. That realization opens the door to the third question, the one that lingers after the facts have settled. If the moon is our nearest neighbor, then where does our loneliness truly begin? It begins, perhaps, the moment we understand that the universe is not designed around our comfort. It begins when we accept that the space between worlds is not a hallway, but a wilderness. It begins when we admit that the warmth of Earth is not the default condition of reality, but a rare local miracle. And it begins when we realize that most of what we call home is not a place at all, but a thin layer of air, a membrane of habit, a pocket of warmth drifting through an ocean that is mostly cold. Carl Sagan once wrote a sentence that has become almost a compass for anyone who stares into the night with honest curiosity. Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. The moon is the first proof of that idea in human history. It is close enough to tempt us, far enough to humble us. It sits there like an invitation, and also like a warning, that the universe will not be domesticated by our expectations. When you look up now, the moon might still feel familiar, but perhaps you will sense the true shape of the distance. You might imagine the silence between here and there. You might imagine the 30 Earths that could hide in that gap. You might feel, not despair, but a kind of clean humility. Because loneliness, in the cosmic sense, is not only isolation, it is also clarity. It strips away the noise and leaves you with what matters, A small world, a fragile breath, a mind capable of reaching across darkness with questions. And that is the bridge to what comes next. Because once the Earth-Moon distance has reshaped your intuition, the rest of the universe is waiting with distances that will make even this neighbor feel like a hand held close. If the moon can be so far while still hanging above us like a gentle light, then what does far truly mean? When we step beyond the moon, beyond the planets, beyond the sun itself. How small is Earth, really, when you place it beside the swollen kings of our solar system, Jupiter and Saturn, and let your imagination do what rulers and maps cannot? Most of us live as if our planet is the largest thing we will ever need to understand. We measure our lives in commutes, in seasons, in miles between cities. We glance at a globe and feel, almost instinctively, that we've grasped the shape of our home. But the universe has a quiet way of undoing that confidence. It does not shout, it simply offers comparison. And comparison, in space, is a kind of gentle devastation. Picture Earth as a marble in your palm, cool and familiar, with its thin skin of oceans and clouds. Now picture Jupiter as a heavy wooden basketball, not just bigger in width, but so much larger in volume that Earth feels like a thought beside it. Jupiter is not simply large, it is a different category of object. A world built more from atmosphere than from ground. A storm-wrapped giant that has been turning for billions of years. Saturn, meanwhile, wears its rings like a slow-moving clock face, a reminder that beauty and scale can coexist, that the cosmos can be both elegant and indifferent. Here's a simple way to feel it without numbers pressing the poetry out of it. Imagine a standard classroom globe as Earth, the kind you used to spin with one finger. Now imagine Jupiter as a beach ball, looming in the room, bright and impossible to ignore. In that single scene, something changes inside you. You realize that planet is not a single idea, it's a spectrum. You realize that our sense of importance is often just a side effect of proximity. And yet, even that comparison is only the doorway, because the solar system is not defined by its planets. It is defined by the vast, almost sacred emptiness between them. The distances are so enormous that the mind instinctively tries to compress them, the way we compress grief or time, just to keep going. But if you let the true spacing return, if you allow the void to take up its rightful place, the entire solar system begins to feel less like a neighborhood and more like an ocean with a few islands scattered far apart. That's where the light comes in, not as a metaphor, but as a measuring stick that refuses to flatter us. Light is the fastest messenger we know, and even it needs time to cross our own cosmic home. A beam leaving the sun takes minutes to reach Earth, and hours to reach the outer worlds. Hours, not to cross a galaxy, not to cross the universe, but to travel across the region we casually call our backyard. And suddenly, the question becomes unavoidable. Are we living in a yard with a fence, or in a sea that only looks small because we've never tried to swim it? This is where the voice of a scientist can sound like the voice of a poet, because the facts themselves carry a kind of awe. Carl Sagan once wrote, "The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. It's not a line meant to shrink you into despair. It's a line meant to soften the ego, to make room for wonder, to remind you that humility can be a form of clarity." And as the scale expands, you start to see why such words are not decoration. They are psychological tools, a way to stay human while contemplating distances that do not care about human scale. Try a second example, one that sneaks the truth into your intuition. Imagine the sun as a bright lamp in the middle of a dark hall. Place a peppercorn a short distance away to represent Earth. Now, if you keep the proportions honest, most of the hall is simply emptiness. The nearest neighbors are far more distant than you want them to be. The orbits are not tight circles like diagrams in textbooks, they are vast sweeps through darkness. What holds it all together is not closeness, but gravity's patient reach, a kind of invisible architecture that doesn't need walls. From there, the meaning of home begins to shift. Home is not just Earth. Home is not even the planets. Home is the sun's domain, the region where its gravity remains the dominant storyteller. But even that has an edge. A place where the solar wind thins, where the sun's influence becomes a faint whisper against the broader galaxy. We have sent spacecraft outward like small prayers made of metal. And as they cross those distant boundaries, they carry a message we rarely say out loud. We are curious creatures living inside a bubble, trying to understand the water by touching the surface. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that the boundary of home is not a line you can draw cleanly. It's a gradient, a fading of familiarity. It is not a wall, it is a transition. The solar system does not end the way a country ends at a border checkpoint. It ends the way daylight ends at dusk, slowly, quietly, with the last warmth lingering while the night takes over. That's why the question is not merely scientific, it is existential. At what point does ours become not ours, and who gets to decide? Neil deGrasse Tyson offers another thought that lands softly but stays with you. We are part of this universe. We are in this universe, but perhaps more important than both, the universe is in us. In other words, the scale is not just out there. It is also in here, in the way our minds stretch, in the way our hearts respond to immensities we cannot hold, yet still somehow recognize. So when we ask whether Earth is small beside Jupiter or Saturn, we're not just asking about size. We're asking what it means to be a creature with a human lifespan living inside a structure measured in light hours, in voids so wide that even the fastest thing we know still needs patience. We're asking whether our instincts, shaped by villages and streets and seasons, can adapt to an ocean of space where near is a word that breaks down. And that brings us, naturally, to the threshold of the next step, because once you feel the solar system as a true expanse, you cannot help but wonder where its true edge lies, and what waits beyond it. If the space between planets already feels like an abyss, what does it mean that our home may extend far beyond what we casually picture? So before we move on, let the question settle like a quiet stone dropped into deep water, and watch the ripples spread through your imagination, where they belong. Where is the real boundary of home in this ocean of darkness? And what does it change about us if we finally admit how far it reaches? Have you ever wondered why astronomers so often speak in time instead of distance, as if the universe refuses to be measured in kilometers the way our roads and oceans are? Out here, beyond the comforting scale of cities and continents, the old units begin to crumble. A kilometer is a human invention, a mark on a ruler we hold in our hands. But the cosmos does not fit in our hands. Space is not a room you can cross in an afternoon. It is an abyss where even the fastest messenger we know, light itself, needs years to whisper from one shore to another. And so, almost gently, astronomers choose a unit that feels less like a number and more like a truth, a light year, a measure that admits something both practical and poetic. It tells you not only how far a thing is, but how long reality has been traveling to reach you. In a sense, using light time is not an aesthetic preference, it is a surrender to how the universe actually communicates. Nothing we have ever observed arrives instantly. Everything arrives late. Every star you admire is already a memory by the time your eyes receive it. When Carl Sagan reminded us that we are made of star stuff, he was not only speaking of chemistry, he was hinting at a deeper intimacy. The same cosmos that forged our atoms also sends us its stories across light and time, and we spend our lives reading the delayed pages. Even the act of looking up becomes a quiet conversation with the past. And this is why, once you understand the logic, kilometers start to feel strangely inappropriate. If I tell you a galaxy is 10 trillion kilometers away, the number is correct, but it is dead. It does not live in your imagination. It cannot breathe. It does not connect to anything you have felt. But if I tell you its light has been traveling for 100 million years, something changes in you. Suddenly you can sense the immensity, not in space, but in time. Your mind recognizes duration. Your body has lived inside time all its life. Time is the one scale you have truly inhabited, and that is why the universe, vast as it is, becomes slightly more graspable when distance is translated into the language of travel time. Think of it this way. Imagine a lighthouse on a foggy coast. You can measure the miles across the water, yes, but what matters to a sailor is when the beam arrives, how long it takes to cut through the haze and reach the eye. The universe is an ocean thick with darkness, and light is the beam. Measuring in light travel time is the sailor's instinct. It tells you how long the signal has been crossing the void, and therefore how old the information is when it finally meets you. Once you feel that, the second question becomes unavoidable. What happens to our perception when far also means past? It quietly rewires everything. In everyday life, distance and time are related but separable. A mountain can be far away and still exist in the present. A friend can be across town and still be living in the same moment as you. But cosmology dissolves that comfort. In the cosmic sense, to see far is to see earlier. There is no clean boundary between where something is and when it is. The further you look, the younger the universe becomes, and the present slips away like sand between your fingers. This is not philosophy painted over science. It is the basic condition of observation in a universe with a finite speed of light. It is why Edwin Hubble's work did more than reveal that galaxies exist beyond our own. It taught us that the universe has a history written into its depths. Every additional layer of distance is an additional layer of time. When you aim a telescope outward, you are not merely expanding your map, you are descending into an archive. Here is a simple example that lets the mind hold the idea without strain. Picture a thunderstorm at night. You see lightning flash across the sky. A few seconds later, the thunder arrives. That delay is not just a curiosity, it is a measurement. Sound is slower than light, so the gap between flash and boom tells you how far the storm is. Now magnify that principle to cosmic proportions. Light is the fastest signal we have, and yet the universe is so large that even light arrives late. The delay is not seconds, but years, centuries, millennia. Your eyes become a sensor of time lag, and the night sky becomes a timeline. A second example, even closer to home, is a message from someone you love. Imagine receiving a letter that was written decades ago, sealed, forgotten, then delivered late. The handwriting is intimate, the emotion is real, but the moment it describes no longer exists. The person may have changed, the house may be gone, the world may have moved on, and yet the letter is still true, still meaningful, still alive in your hands. Starlight is like that. It is a letter from a place that may have transformed since it was sent. Sometimes the sender is still there, sometimes it has long since vanished. Either way, what you hold is the past made visible. This is where a quiet astonishment settles in. When we look outward, are we seeing space, or are we seeing time itself? The honest answer is both, fused together so completely that the separation becomes artificial. We are trained to imagine the universe as a stage, with objects placed at distances like props. But the real universe is more like a film already in motion, and light is the projector beam carrying each frame to us. The deeper you look, the earlier the frames. The sky is not a ceiling, it is a record. Albert Einstein put it with stark simplicity. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. In everyday life, that illusion is useful. It keeps our lives coherent. It lets us speak of now as if it is a universal agreement. But astronomy loosens the illusion's grip. There is no single cosmic now that everyone shares. Different regions of the universe reveal themselves to us at different ages. The present, in a cosmic sense, is fractured into countless arriving messages, each one stamped with its own departure time. And yet, there is something strangely calming in this. It means the universe is not merely around us, it is within our awareness as a living continuum. When you watch a distant galaxy, you are not only seeing an object, You are witnessing the universe in the act of becoming. You are seeing what it used to be, and by comparing that with what we see nearby, we begin to infer how everything changes. The measurement of light time is not a cold trick of units, it is the key that unlocks cosmic evolution. So the next time you hear a distance measured in light years, let it land in you the way it is meant to. Not as a statistic, but as a pilgrimage of photons. Every beam of starlight has crossed a wilderness of emptiness, endured the expansion of space, slipped past dust and gravity, and finally arrived at your eyes. It is as if the universe has been traveling toward you for millions or billions of years, just to be noticed for a moment in the quiet of your room. And that leaves us with a gentle, unsettling thought to carry forward. If looking outward is also looking backward, then every telescope is, in a way, a time machine. Not a machine that brings us into the past, but a machine that brings the past into us. We do not merely observe the universe, we receive it. We become the place where ancient light finally comes to rest. So when you lift your gaze and feel that familiar pull of wonder, ask yourself the question that changes everything. When we look farther, are we searching for what is out there? Or are we searching for what time has hidden from us and what it still remembers about who we are? Have you ever noticed how the night sky can feel intimate, almost close enough to touch, until you remember that the nearest star beyond our own sun is still years of light away, and suddenly the universe stops being a backdrop and becomes a distance you can almost feel in your chest? The closest star system, Proxima Centauri, is not next door in any human sense. It is a message in a bottle sent across an ocean where the waves are made of vacuum and time. That one fact quietly tells us something unsettling about the sun. Not that it is lonely in an emotional way, but that it occupies a kind of cosmic solitude, an island of fire, surrounded by a darkness so vast that even neighbor is a word we borrow from the wrong world. When astronomers say 4.2 light years, they are not offering a statistic, they are offering a perspective shift, because a light year is time wearing the mask of distance, and time is the one currency none of us can print more of. To make it real, try a simple comparison that your mind can hold without breaking. Imagine the earth is a grain of pepper on your kitchen table, and the sun is a grapefruit a few steps away. In that model, the outer planets drift at the far edges of your room, and you might feel you've built a whole solar neighborhood out of familiar objects, neat, comprehensible, almost cozy. But then you ask where the nearest star would be, and the answer is not in your house, not on your street, not even in your city. It would be hundreds of miles away, a second grapefruit placed in another state. That is how empty the space between stars truly is, not empty as in meaningless, but empty as in brutally honest. A silence so complete that it forces the imagination to slow down and listen. Another example, even more sobering, is to picture the fastest things we've ever thrown into that silence. Like the Voyager probes, small human-made messengers moving faster than any aircraft, any bullet, any storm, yet still crawling by cosmic standards. If a beam of light could circle Earth more than 7 times in a single second, Voyager needs years to travel what light crosses in a day, and tens of thousands of years to approach even the nearest star at its current pace. Close begins to crumble when you translate it into travel, and travel into lifetimes. And that leads straight into the question that sits underneath everything. If our fastest craft would require tens of thousands of years to reach the nearest star, does the word near still mean what we think it means? Or has the universe been quietly using its own dictionary all along? We are creatures evolved to survive on a savanna scale, where a distant hill is a challenge and a far horizon is a day's walk. So our language is tuned to human distances, human patience, human limits. But the cosmos is not obligated to fit inside our intuition, and it never was. That is why the old sayings from the great scientific storytellers keep returning like constellations, not because they solve the problem, but because they help us stand inside it without flinching. Carl Sagan once reminded us that somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known, and the power of that line is that it does not promise convenience. It promises wonder. Stephen Hawking offered a gentler instruction that feels almost like a meditation in the face of these scales. Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet, as if perspective itself is a kind of freedom. Still, the tension remains. Are we truly limited by our technology, or by the nature of the universe, by the rules written into space-time itself? Technology is the part we can change, and history proves we change it constantly. We learn to fly, to split atoms, to land instruments on other worlds, to measure the wobble of stars and infer unseen planets, to read the faint afterglow of the early cosmos like a fossil imprint in light. So it is tempting to believe the barrier is merely temporary, that with enough ingenuity we will turn interstellar travel from impossible to routine. Yet physics whispers a more complicated truth. The speed of light is not just a speed, it is a boundary woven into causality, a limit that shapes how information and influence propagate through reality. Even if we dream of breakthroughs, of warped space, of shortcuts in geometry, we must admit that the universe seems structured in a way that makes distance meaningful, not as a punishment, but as a fundamental feature, like the depth of the ocean is a feature of Earth, not an insult to swimmers. And here is where the story becomes quietly beautiful rather than discouraging. Because once you accept how far the nearest star truly is, you start to see that the sun's isolation is not merely emptiness, it is a sanctuary, a cradle, a protected pocket where complex life had time to emerge without constant disruption. The spaces between stars are so vast that collisions are rare, threats are diluted, and stability becomes possible. That same distance that blocks our travel also grants us long seasons of peace. The universe, in a strange balance, gives with one hand and takes with the other. It separates, and it shelters, it withholds, and it allows. In that sense, the question is not only, can we reach the stars, but what does it mean that we exist at all in a cosmos where reaching the next island is so hard? So when you hear that the nearest star is still years of light away, let it land like a soft weight rather than a hard wall. Let it teach your intuition to breathe slower. Let it reframe the word near into something more honest, not a distance you can drive, but a relationship you can measure in time, in energy, in generations. And perhaps that is the deeper educational gift hidden inside this scale. The realization that the universe is not built for our convenience, it is built for truth, and truth often arrives as humility. We are not trapped simply because our engines are weak, and we are not free simply because our dreams are strong. We are participants inside a reality whose architecture is older than our species and wider than our imagination. If the sun is an island, then we are the rare inhabitants who have learned to look across the dark ocean and ask questions that matter. Not only, how far is it, but why is it so far? And what kind of beings are we, that we feel called to cross it at all? Have you ever wondered whether the Milky Way is a thing you can point to, or a story too vast to hold in a single word? A living swarm of suns that only looks like one object because we are too small to see its inner weather. A galaxy, in the simplest sense, is a gravitational family, a long keeping of matter by the gentle but relentless hand of gravity. Yet the question remains almost poetic. Can something made of hundreds of billions of stars, threaded with dust, gas, magnetic fields, dark matter, and time itself, truly be called a single object? From far away, the Milky Way would appear as one luminous spiral, a coherent form with arms curling like ink in water. From within, it feels less like an object and more like a climate, a vast rotating ecology, where stars are born, age, and die, where shockwaves ripple through cold clouds, where unseen mass shapes the dance of everything you can see. The mind wants a simple noun, but the universe keeps offering verbs: forming, drifting, colliding, glowing, fading. Edwin Hubble once said that, equipped with his 5 senses, man explores the universe around him and calls the adventure science. It is a line that fits here because what we call a galaxy is not only a physical structure, it is an adventure of scale, a test of how far the mind can stretch without tearing. And it is worth remembering what Carl Sagan reminded us. Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. The Milky Way is one of those incredible things hiding in plain sight, visible as a pale river of light to anyone who has ever stood under a truly dark sky, and yet still profoundly unknown in its full detail. Now let the scale land gently. Light, the fastest messenger we know, would need roughly 100,000 years to cross the Milky Way from one edge of the stellar disk to the other. That single fact should change the atmosphere in your thoughts, because it means the galaxy is not just big, it is time made into distance. Imagine a letter sent at light speed, leaving one rim of the galaxy when early humans were still painting caves, and arriving at the other rim in a future so far away that everything familiar about our world might be unrecognizable. This is where the second question begins to open. If light needs 100,000 years to make the journey, where are we inside that immensity? We live in the galaxy the way a person lives in a forest, not seeing the whole shape at once, but sensing patterns, shadows, clearings, and trails. Our sun is not in the bright, crowded center, and it is not hanging out at the fragile edges either. It sits in a quieter region of the disk, about 2/3 of the way out from the core, in a spiral arm segment often called the Orion Spur, a modest neighborhood between larger arms. If you want an image that makes this feel real, picture a vast city at night, the dazzling downtown packed with lights and motion, and then imagine a calmer suburb, still part of the same city, still held by the same roads and laws, but with more space between houses, more silence between sirens, more sky between street lamps. We are not at the center of the cosmic city, but we are not outside it. We are in a place where the night can still be dark enough for questions to arise. Or take another example, one closer to the body than to the intellect. Imagine standing inside a gigantic cathedral, so large that the far walls vanish into haze. You cannot see the architecture from where you stand, but you can hear the way sound behaves. You can feel the temperature shift near stone. You can sense that the building has a shape because the echoes tell you so. That is what astronomy often is, from inside a galaxy. We infer structure from motion, from light, from the subtle fingerprints in spectra, from the way objects orbit what they cannot directly see. The Milky Way becomes one object, not because it is simple, but because the laws of gravity bind it into a coherent whole. A single spinning system whose parts share a common center and a common history. And that history matters, because a galaxy is not frozen like a sculpture, it is closer to a long piece of music. Themes appearing, evolving, returning in new forms. The disk rotates. The spiral arms are not rigid bars but patterns, like traffic waves that move through cars without being made of any single car. Star nurseries flare within cold molecular clouds. Supernovae enrich space with heavier elements. And those elements become new worlds, new oceans, new minds that wonder what kind of object could hold so many lives in potential. In that sense, calling a galaxy a single object is a convenience for the tongue. But the deeper truth is that it is an ongoing process, a conversation between matter and gravity over billions of years, which brings us, almost inevitably, to the quiet sting of the last question. Is our position special or utterly ordinary? There is a temptation, especially in the human heart, to imagine a privileged seat, a center, a chosen vantage point. Yet again and again, the cosmos invites a different kind of dignity. Not the dignity of being central, but the dignity of being aware. Our location in the Milky Way appears, in many ways, remarkably unremarkable. We are not placed at the galactic core where radiation and crowded orbits would likely make stable planetary systems difficult. We are not exiled to the sparse outskirts where heavy elements may be less abundant. We are, by cosmic standards, in a reasonable middle ground, a region with enough heavy elements to build rocky worlds and chemistry. and enough distance from the most violent central activity for life to persist long enough to evolve complexity. And perhaps that is the most profound twist, that ordinary can be the cradle of extraordinary outcomes. A quiet neighborhood can give rise to a species that learns to measure the galaxy, to listen to the chemical whispers of starlight, to map the invisible scaffolding of dark matter, to look at a thin band of milky glow and realize it is not a cloud at all, but a sideways view through a disk of countless suns. This is not a tale of being chosen. It is a tale of becoming conscious within a system that does not pause for us, and yet somehow includes us. Even the word Milky Way is a human metaphor, the universe translated into the language of milk, rivers, roads, and home, because our minds reach for what we know when faced with what we cannot fully hold. So when you ask whether a galaxy can be called a single object, you are really asking how language holds reality. When you ask where we are within a structure that takes 100,000 years for light to cross, you are really asking what here means. And when you ask whether our position is special, you are really asking how to find meaning in a universe that is not designed for flattery. Maybe the answer is not to demand that we be central, but to notice that we are capable of wonder, capable of learning, capable of humility. The Milky Way does not need us to be special in order for our existence to be astonishing. It only needs us to look up with honest eyes and to recognize that we are, at once, insignificant in scale and immense in implication. A small world in a vast rotating cathedral of stars, asking questions that the night itself seems eager to keep alive. When you look up at the night sky and realize that some of those faint smudges are not stars at all, but entire galaxies, a quiet question begins to rise in the mind like a tide. Are we seeing islands of light or oceans of stars? At first, the word galaxy feels like a label, a neat term in a textbook. But linger with it for a moment and it becomes something else entirely, a living city of suns, a drifting archive of time, a great wheel of matter turning through dark space. In the deepest photographs, the universe does not appear empty. It appears crowded with these shining elsewheres, each one a separate congregation of stars, each one with its own history, its own storms, its own long seasons of creation and collapse. It is difficult to hold that image without feeling a shift inside you, because it means the Milky Way is not the stage of existence. It is merely one lantern among countless lanterns, floating in a night so vast that our language starts to fail. And yet, even as we say countless, our minds hunger for a number. How many galaxies are there? How many worlds? How many chances for life? The desire is human, but it is not trivial. It is the same desire that once led sailors across unknown seas and travelers through deserts, the instinct to know whether the horizon is a wall or a doorway. Carl Sagan once reminded us that somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. And that line endures not because it is poetic, but because it is accurate in spirit, a summary of what happens every time our instruments sharpen and the universe answers with more questions than we asked. If you could step outside the Milky Way and look back, you might recognize it the way you recognize a coastline from above. A luminous swirl edged with darker bays, a soft center thick with stars, and spiral arms like pale rivers. But then you would turn, and you would see Andromeda, and beyond it Triangulum, and then more, and more, and more, until the idea of a few neighbors would dissolve into the recognition that the cosmos is filled with communities of galaxies, gathering in clusters and drifting in superclusters, like archipelagos separated by profound darkness. This is where the metaphor matters, because islands imply separation, distinctness, the sense that each galaxy is a self-contained world. Oceans imply continuity, the sense that there is a vast underlying medium in which these structures float like continents in a sea, which is closer to the truth. In one sense, galaxies are islands because the distances between them are so enormous that a traveler would cross more emptiness than we can comfortably imagine. In another sense, they are not isolated at all, because gravity binds them into long relationships, and invisible matter, whatever it is, seems to weave a kind of cosmic scaffolding that guides their formation and shapes their motion. Islands, yes, but islands connected by unseen currents. To make this feel real, consider a first example that is almost embarrassingly simple. Imagine the Milky Way as a city with 100 billion houses, each house a star. Now, imagine standing at the edge of that city and seeing a distant city across a dark valley so wide that even a beam of light would need millions of years to cross it. That is what it means to look at another galaxy. You are not just looking at faraway lights, you are looking across time itself, because the glow you see began its journey before human beings were building anything we would recognize as civilization. The photograph is not a snapshot of now. It is a message in transit, a memory arriving late. And then a second example, more intimate, more unsettling. Picture Earth as a single grain of sand on a long beach. Even if you walked the shoreline for your entire life, counting grains, you would still be counting something absurdly smaller than what a single galaxy contains in stars alone. Now take that whole beach and imagine it as only one coastline on one world among countless worlds. And you begin to sense what astronomers mean when they speak about scale. The universe does not merely exceed our comprehension, it exceeds our instincts. It forces us to learn new ways of thinking, not because it wants to impress us, but because it is simply larger than the mind that evolved to survive in forests and plains. This is where the question of how many worlds becomes deeper than arithmetic. If each galaxy is a world, then the universe is not a place with a few scattered worlds, it is a place made of worlds. But there is a subtle twist, because what we call a world is often tied to life, and life is the most difficult part of the story. We can count galaxies through surveys and infer their numbers through deep field observations, yet we cannot count civilizations, or biospheres, or minds. We can only infer, and we must be humble. Edwin Hubble, the man whose work expanded our universe overnight, once said, "Equipped with his 5 senses, man explores the universe around him and calls the adventure science." That word adventure is not decoration, it is a confession. It means we proceed without guarantees. It means we move forward through evidence and doubt together, as companions. So is life rare, or merely rare in our line of sight? The honest answer is that we do not yet know, and the not knowing should not be treated as failure. It should be treated as the most important invitation, because consider how narrow our window is. We have listened for radio whispers across a fraction of the sky for a fraction of a century. We have only begun to taste the atmospheres of distant planets, only begun to recognize that worlds can orbit other suns by the billions. Even within our own solar system, we still debate where life might hide, in subsurface oceans, in the chemistry of methane seas, in warm pockets beneath ice. If we have not fully explored our own cosmic neighborhood, what does it mean to claim the universe is silent? There is also the matter of time, a dimension we often forget when we ask about neighbors. A galaxy can be old, but a technological civilization might be brief. The overlap between two civilizations could be like two fireflies blinking in a storm, visible only if their flashes happen to coincide. It may be that life is common, yet contact is rare. It may be that intelligence arises often, yet remains quiet. It may be that the universe is not empty of minds, but empty of bridges between minds. And still, the most profound part of the question is not whether we are alone, but what changes in us when we realize how much we cannot see. When you look at a galaxy, you are looking at a structure shaped by physics and chance, by gravity and collision, by the slow alchemy of stars forging heavier elements in their cores and scattering them through supernova winds. In that sense, a galaxy is not merely a backdrop, it is a kind of ancestral environment. The atoms in your body were not born on Earth. They were born in stars. They were assembled over eons, then gathered into planets, then into life, then into you, a creature capable of turning around and wondering where it came from. The universe is not just out there, it is in here. And that is why these questions never feel purely scientific. They feel personal. So when we ask whether galaxies are islands or oceans, we are also asking what kind of universe we live in. A universe of separation, or a universe of connection. When we ask how many worlds there are, we are also asking how wide the stage of possibility might be. When we ask whether life is rare, we are also asking whether the miracle we call consciousness is a lonely candle or a widespread dawn. And perhaps the most honest posture is not certainty, but attentive wonder, the kind that does not rush to conclude, the kind that stays with the evidence and the mystery at the same time. Because tonight, as we continue this journey outward, one truth becomes impossible to avoid. Every time we widen our view, the universe grows not only in size, but in meaning. And that leaves us with a final question to carry forward, quiet but persistent. When we see other galaxies shining like distant shores in the dark, are we looking at places where life never happened, or at places where it did, and we simply have not learned how to hear one another yet? What if the universe is not a scattered wilderness of galaxies, but a single, immense tapestry, stitched together by forces we can barely name and only partly measure? We often imagine galaxies as lonely islands, drifting in an endless dark. Yet when astronomers map the sky in 3 dimensions, a different picture emerges, one that feels almost like discovering the grain of wood beneath a painted surface. Galaxies gather into groups, groups gather into clusters, and clusters gather into superclusters, vast assemblies stretching across hundreds of millions of light years, as if the cosmos itself has preferences, as if it remembers where matter should go. And the moment you see this, truly see it, a quiet unease follows. Because the question becomes unavoidable: what is doing the gathering, and why does it look so organized? At the deepest level, the first answer is both simple and astonishing. Gravity. Not merely the gravity of one galaxy tugging on another, but the cumulative pull of everything, visible and invisible, shaping the large-scale architecture of the universe over billions of years. It begins with tiny irregularities in the early cosmos, faint ripples in density that acted like seeds. Over time, gravity amplifies those seeds, pulling matter into filaments and knots, leaving behind enormous voids, and building something that resembles a cosmic web. This is the universe's quiet craft, its slow hand at work, a sculptor that never hurries. Gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who sets the planets in motion, Isaac Newton once wrote. And even if modern physics has carried us far beyond Newton's era, the spirit of that remark still lingers here. We can describe the pull, we can calculate the collapse, we can simulate the growth of structure, but the feeling remains that we are watching a grand mechanism whose first impulse is hidden behind a veil. And then there is the second, more elusive ingredient, the one that turns this from a neat story into a deeper mystery: dark matter. We do not see it. We do not touch it. But the universe behaves as if it is there, outweighing ordinary matter and forming invisible scaffolding for galaxies to assemble upon. In a sense, the bright galaxies we admire are like frost outlining the shape of a window pane you cannot otherwise perceive. You look at the glittering pattern and realize the true structure is something beneath it. That is why the largest structures in the cosmos can exist at all, why clusters remain bound, why superclusters gather along filaments like beads along threads. There is a haunting elegance to it, because it suggests that what we call reality may be only the luminous surface of a much larger, darker anatomy. To make this feel real, picture a winter night where the air is so cold you can hear your own breath. Now imagine a vast spider web stretched across a field, but you cannot see the silk. All you see are dewdrops clinging to it, shining in moonlight. Each dewdrop is a galaxy. The web is the cosmic structure. The drops do not float randomly. They reveal a pattern, a hidden geometry. The universe, on its largest scales, behaves like that. We are not looking at chaos sprinkled with stars. We are looking at a network, a framework, a kind of cosmic handwriting. And once you accept that, the next question comes naturally, almost like a whisper from the dark itself. When a supercluster stretches across hundreds of millions of light-years, is the word size still the right word? Or does size belong to human rooms and human roads, to things that can be crossed within a lifetime? There is a strange psychological threshold here. Up close, size feels intimate. A mountain is big because we can climb it and feel our lungs burn. An ocean is vast because we can sail for days and still see no end. But a supercluster is so enormous that even the idea of crossing it becomes a kind of myth. It is not simply large, it is beyond the scale where the body can help the mind. In that realm, numbers stop being descriptions and start becoming prayers, attempts to speak what cannot be pictured. This is where a line attributed to Albert Einstein feels less like a clever quotation and more like a compass for the soul. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. We are tiny, and yet we can trace the outlines of these immense structures with mathematics and patient observation. There is humility in that, and there is wonder, and perhaps there is also a quiet warning. Because the moment we think we have named something, we risk believing we have fully understood it. So what, then, are we actually witnessing when we look at the universe's large-scale structure, order, or chaos with rules? The honest answer might be that it is both, depending on how close you stand to the painting. Up close, the cosmos is turbulent. Galaxies collide, stars explode, black holes feed, and the sky is full of violent events. But step back far enough, and the violence becomes texture, like waves on the surface of a sea that still follows the pull of the moon. The large-scale distribution of matter begins to look orderly, statistical, almost serene. Not because nothing happens, but because everything happens within constraints. The universe is not a rigid machine, yet it is not a coin toss either. It is more like weather on a planetary scale, patterns emerging from countless interactions, shaped by fundamental laws. Think of how a murmuration of starlings swirls at dusk. Each bird moves freely, responding to neighbors, turning in sudden, fluid gestures. From the ground, it looks like chaos. From above, it becomes choreography. The cosmos may be doing something similar, only with galaxies instead of birds, and with time measured in billions of years instead of seconds. A second example brings it even closer. Imagine a river delta seen from the air, branching into countless channels as it approaches the sea. No single droplet of water knows the shape of the delta, and yet the delta forms, again and again, as if the landscape itself is guiding the flow. In the universe, gravity is the landscape. Matter is the water. Over immense time, the flow carves filaments and leaves voids, building a pattern that repeats across scales, not perfectly, but recognizably, like a signature. And in that repeating pattern, we begin to sense the difference between randomness and deeper law. Not fate, not intention in the human sense, but structure arising naturally, inevitably, as if the universe cannot help but organize itself. And yet, even with all this, a final unease remains, the kind that keeps thoughtful people awake. If the cosmos builds superclusters and filaments with such elegance, why do we exist in a place that feels so quiet, so local, so small? Why does our daily life unfold on a thin layer of rock and water, while above us stretches an architecture so vast that words fail? Perhaps the point is not to feel insignificant, but to feel properly placed. The universe does not diminish you by being enormous. It invites you to expand inward, to recognize that your mind can travel farther than your body ever will. Education, at its best, is not a list of facts. It is a widening of the horizon. It is the transformation of I didn't know into I can see. And when you see the cosmic web, when you grasp that thousands of galaxies can be bound into a single colossal structure, you start to feel a rare kind of calm. Not the calm of certainty, but the calm of perspective. Because maybe that is the real lesson of these superclusters. They are not just large. They are reminders that reality has layers. Close up, there is noise, motion, struggle. Farther out, there is pattern. And farther still, there is mystery. So the question is not only what binds galaxies together, but what binds our curiosity to the sky. What binds the human mind to these distant structures it will never touch? And when we stand at this threshold, between comprehension and awe, one thought returns like a refrain, gentle and insistent. Are we witnessing order, or merely chaos that looks like order from far away? And if the universe can weave patterns on scales beyond imagination, what other patterns might exist, just beyond the edge of what we can currently see? Have you ever wondered if the universe is hiding things from us, not out of malice, but out of sheer distance and time? We look up and feel surrounded by stars. Yet what we call the cosmos is only the portion of reality that has had enough time to send its light across the abyss and reach our eyes. In that sense, the night sky is not a complete portrait, it is a message in transit. It is a letter that can only arrive if the universe has been old enough, and if the light has been fast enough, and if nothing along the way has swallowed it into darkness. The most unsettling part is not that there are places we cannot see. It is that there are places whose light has never reached us, and never will, because space itself is stretching like a slow, endless breath, widening the gap even as the photons run. It helps to imagine a lighthouse on a foggy coast. The beam sweeps, strong and confident, but the ocean is so vast that the light fades long before it touches the far horizon. Not because the lighthouse is weak, but because distance is merciless. Now replace the fog with billions of years, replace the ocean with expanding space, and replace the lighthouse with the first stars, and you begin to feel why there can be regions of the universe that remain forever unseen. Or think of thunder after lightning. You can watch the flash instantly, but the sound arrives later, sometimes much later. Not because the storm is hesitant, but because there is a speed limit built into the world. In the universe, light is the lightning, and we are always waiting for the thunder that may never come. This is where the idea of an observable universe becomes both a scientific tool and a quiet philosophical mirror. What we can see is not everything that exists, it is everything that has had the chance to announce itself to us since the universe began. Stephen Hawking once warned us, "We are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star." And yet, even that humbling sentence carries a hidden tenderness, because it means the universe has still allowed a small mind to notice the vastness surrounding it. Carl Sagan framed it with a gentler ache when he said, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." Between those two voices, one sober and one hopeful, you can feel the strange tension of modern cosmology. We are insignificant in scale, and yet capable of reverence. But then comes the deeper question, the one that lingers like an echo in a cathedral of stone. If every observer has their own observable universe, then where is the whole? The answer is not a simple map you can unfold on a table. It is more like a personal horizon that travels with you, a boundary drawn not by walls, but by time itself. Wherever you stand, you are at the center of your own cosmic bubble, not because you are special, but because light reaches you from all directions, and your past is shaped like a sphere around you. Move to another galaxy and the bubble changes. Wait long enough and it changes again. Reality, in this sense, is not a single picture, it is countless overlapping views, each stitched from what has had time to arrive. Here is a second example to hold in your mind, simple enough to feel in your bones. Imagine standing in a desert at night with a lantern. The circle of light around your feet is your known world for that moment. Beyond it, there may be mountains, ruins, a river, an entire city, but none of it exists to your senses until it enters the reach of illumination. Now imagine the lantern light traveling outward at a fixed speed, and imagine the desert expanding as you shine it, so that the darkness recedes and yet never truly ends. That is the paradox the universe invites us to contemplate. The more we learn, the more we realize that knowledge has a boundary, and the boundary is not a failure of curiosity. It is built into the structure of space-time. And so, are we at the center of everything, or only at the center of our own view? Both thoughts can be true, depending on what you mean by center. In a purely observational sense, you are always centered in your own sky, because your senses collect information that radiates toward you. But in a cosmic sense, the universe grants no privileged throne. There is no fixed middle point stamped into the fabric of existence, no sacred coordinate marked here is where it all began. What feels like centrality is simply the geometry of perception, and yet perception is not trivial. It is how the universe becomes aware of itself, through countless eyes, instruments, minds, and questions that flicker on briefly like candles in a windless temple. And this is the quiet educational gift hidden inside the mystery. The observable universe teaches humility without despair. It teaches that our measurements are not lies, but they are not the whole truth either. It teaches that seeing is always partial, and yet partial seeing can still be profound. We live inside a horizon not because we are punished, but because we are finite beings in a universe with finite time. And the universe, for all its enormity, still permits meaning to arise inside small moments of understanding. The deepest wonder may not be that there are regions we cannot reach, but that we can reach as far as we do, and that the light, traveling for billions of years, still finds its way into our eyes like a message meant to be received. So, as we continue, hold that thought gently. Every time you hear the phrase, the edge of the universe, remember, it is not a hard wall, it is a moving boundary of arrival, a frontier drawn by the speed of light and the age of everything. And if that frontier moves with us, if each observer carries a different slice of the cosmos, then perhaps the universe is not a single story told from one vantage point, but a vast library of perspectives. The question is not only what lies beyond our horizon, but what it means that the horizon exists at all. Are we merely looking outward, or is the universe, through us, learning how to look back? What lies beyond the rim of what we can see, when the last reachable light fades into the dark, and even our best instruments fall silent? Is it more matter, more space, or rules so unfamiliar that our language breaks before it can describe them? We live inside a kind of cosmic shoreline. The observable universe is not a wall you could touch. It is a limit drawn by time itself, a boundary set by how long light has had to travel since the beginning of our cosmic story. And that detail changes everything, because it means the edge is not necessarily where reality ends, it is where our access ends. Carl Sagan once wrote, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." And the power of that line is not in the promise of a single discovery, but in the humility it demands of us. The universe does not owe us visibility. It does not arrange itself to fit inside our telescopes, our equations, or our need for closure. It simply unfolds, vast and quiet, whether we understand it or not. To feel this, imagine a ship at sea on a clear day. The ocean does not stop at the horizon. The horizon is only the farthest line your eyes can claim at once, a circle that travels with you, always keeping its distance. You can sail toward it for weeks and never arrive, not because it is unreal, but because it is a limit of perspective. In a similar way, the cosmic horizon is not a physical fence at the edge of existence. It is the farthest now that can ever reach you, the border between what the universe has had time to show and what it has not. Beyond that border could be more galaxies, more emptiness, more surprises, or perhaps something stranger still, regions where the geometry of space behaves differently, or where the distribution of matter is not like our local neighborhood. We cannot assert it, but we can allow the possibility, and there is a kind of calm intelligence in admitting what we do not know. And yet the mind always wants to finish the sentence. We ask, does the universe end? Is there a final line, a last coordinate, a place where space simply stops, like the edge of a map? Or is the end only a habit of human thinking, the way we try to contain infinity by turning it into a destination. Here, it helps to shift the question. In geometry, a surface can be finite without having an edge. Picture the surface of a sphere. It has a limited area, yet you can walk in any direction forever without ever finding a cliff. Some cosmologists have entertained the idea that the universe could be like that, finite yet unbounded, curving back on itself in ways that do not require an outside. This is not a claim. It is a tool for imagination, a reminder that ending is not the only alternative to infinite. When we move from everyday intuition to cosmic structure, our metaphors must evolve, or they will betray us. Stephen Hawking once said, "My goal is simple. It is a complete understanding of the universe, why it is as it is, and why it exists at all." There is courage in that ambition, but also a hidden tenderness, because it reveals what we truly seek. We are not only collecting facts, we are trying to locate ourselves inside the story those facts imply. The deeper we go, the more the universe stops behaving like a place we merely occupy and starts feeling like a question we are living inside. And that is why the third question you posed becomes the most human of them all. After traveling in thought from Earth to the farthest light, the final mystery is not the size, but the meaning of our presence within it. If the cosmos extends beyond anything we can observe, then our knowledge will always be partial, like reading a single page from a library whose shelves vanish into darkness. But partial does not mean pointless. A single page can still change a life. A single glimpse can still rearrange the soul. Education at this scale is not about memorizing distances. It is about learning what it feels like to think honestly at the edge of what can be known, and to keep the mind steady there. Because something subtle happens when you stare long enough at the cosmic horizon. Your anxieties begin to shrink. Your certainties soften. You realize that the universe has been expanding for billions of years without your permission, without your applause, and yet somehow it produced beings who can ask about it. That fact alone is astonishing. We are matter that learned to measure itself. We are the universe looking back, not in a mystical certainty, but in a physical, fragile way, through neurons and instruments, and the strange inner silence where awe is born. So if there is an edge of everything, perhaps it is not a place out there in space. Perhaps it is the edge of our current understanding, the point where our models go quiet and our questions grow more careful. And the question that carries us into the next moment is not shouted, it is whispered, like a vow we make to curiosity itself. If the universe is larger than what we can ever see, then what kind of beings must we become to remain worthy of the unknown? As we come to the end of this journey, what remains is not a final answer, but a quieter understanding. We began with measurements and distances, with planets, stars, and horizons. But along the way, the universe gently shifted the focus back toward us. The true scale of the cosmos is not only something we calculate, it is something we feel, in the way our certainty softens when faced with immensity. The lesson hidden in this vastness is simple and demanding at the same time. Knowledge grows fastest when humility leads the way. From my own perspective, the most valuable insight is not whether the universe has an edge, or what might exist beyond it. It is the realization that our place in the cosmos is defined less by size and more by awareness. We are small, undeniably so, yet we are capable of wonder, patience, and careful thought. That combination matters. It suggests that meaning does not require centrality, and significance does not require dominance. Sometimes, to understand our role, we must accept that we are not the main characters, but attentive witnesses. There is also a deeper educational thread running through everything we explored. When we learn to think beyond familiar scales, we train the mind to live comfortably with uncertainty. We learn to ask better questions rather than rush toward comforting conclusions. In a universe that may be far larger than anything we can ever observe, curiosity itself becomes a responsibility, a way of honoring what we do not yet know. Before we part, I want to sincerely thank you for spending this time together, for listening, reflecting, and allowing these ideas to settle in your own way. Your presence, your thoughts, and your quiet attention are what give meaning to explorations like this. If something in this journey stayed with you, I invite you to share it in the comments. The universe may be vast and silent, but conversations like this remind us that wonder is something we can still share.